who is universally loved, but actually an asshole. Old reference, but Gary Berghoff AskReddit from MAS*H. Apparently he was notoriously hard to work with, and generally an asshole to the movie and show cast and crew, but his character was so beloved that viewers never thought he was like that. On the flip side, poor Larry Linville, Major Frank Burns, was known to be an extremely nice guy, but got sneered at and generally treated like crap by the public due to his character in the show. Just goes to show you should separate the art from the artist. I grew up near Gary. He lived in my hometown for a long time and had some kids when he was quite old already. I went to school with his son in the early 2000s. Have met him and saw him around a lot. Can confirm he's a total dick. And you cannot call him radar. He'll flip his absolute shit on you. Not sure if they are universally loved, but I used to work in restaurants for the House of Mouse, and both Howie Mandel and Bobby McFerrin were total jerks. Acted like they were completely above everyone else, and both of them let their bratty kids run screaming around the restaurant. Always smart when people carrying hot trays of food are everywhere. I had a lot of positive celebrity interactions, but those two were awful. Can't stand to listen to Don't Worry, Be Happy since. I can confirm Mandel was a total asshole. I work at a restaurant in Toronto that threw some party for some game show, and he was such a dick to everyone, to the point no one wanted to help him. He made some snide comment about who he is, and I said, oh that's nice, but these other folks were still here before you. Rachel Ray. Loved her show until I went to see her live. In between takes she was a very not nice person. I knew someone who did production work for Food Network in the early 2000s. Most of the personalities at the time were actually pretty lovely, but apparently Rachel Ray was borderline despised by the film and production crews. She was just generally known as a mean person to work with. I had one of her cookbooks because I found it at a thrift store. It was just unnecessarily confusing. Instead of steps, there's paragraphs. She has no idea how long prep work actually takes. In the 15 seconds the garlic is sauteing, before adding the oysters, zest 3 lemons. That kind of stuff. It's become public knowledge now, but Ellen DeGeneres. I met her, briefly, while working events at Universal Studios FL. Back in the mid-2000s she would on occasion film her talk show on location at Universal. My job would call for me to interact with Ellen and her crew for prepping and crowd control measures. There were 2 occasions that raised an eyebrow. First was behind set, the show was getting ready to start, and I went back to tell her crew that we were ready for her to make her way to the stage, where her show was being recorded. When I walked back there I saw Ellen yelling at a crew member, inches from his face. She was belittling him and threatened to leave him in FL. Second occasion was brief but impactful. One of my coworkers was standing somewhat close to her, back to back with her. Ellen turned around, looked at her with a look of disbelief, and after a couple seconds said, "Aren't you just an invader of space?" She scoffed and walked away. We were both looking at each other thinking WTF is her problem. So for all those years I always thought of her as a funny, while all of America loved her. I was not surprised when all those stories of her being awful to work with came to light. I already had experienced it. I remember reading a tweet thread from some theater actress recounted meeting in Hesh in the late 90s and having a friendly conversation until Ellen arrived by slamming her brakes and yelling at Hesh to get over, followed by telling the actress to stay the fuck away from Hesh. I don't think he's famous enough to be universally loved, but Mitch Albom, aka the author of Tuesdays with Morrie, hosted him at an author event for a small venue, and he was fucking furious that the event was so beneath him, was furious we didn't have a plate of fresh fruit for him, he didn't have a rider or anything demanding we have fruit at the ready, just expected us to know, was furious that more people didn't show up to fawn over him, was just generally furious. Instead of talking about his book during the lecture, he spent 20 minutes taking a steaming dump over the staff, venue, and audience. Ironic given the subject of his books. Edit. The only person we should talk more was J.A. Jens, who writes a handful of detective series and one inexplicable collection of poems. She loved doing events at our place and was there every 6 months to promote her newest book. She had a huge and devoted following, which baffled me because her events are insane. She once spent an entire hour singing for the audience. Not well. When we tried to tell her we were now closing, she sort of waved grandly to her adoring fans and said not until these people have heard me talk about my books, and then kept us open an additional hour while she mostly didn't talk about her book. She also always demanded we had copies of her poetry book on hand despite the fact that no one wanted it and we could rarely even get copies from the publisher. Once we even wound up buying some from a discount bin at Costco just so we could technically have some on hand. Edit 2. It may have been a Walmart discount bin. It's been a minute. Martha Stewart. I witnessed her call her assistant and I quote, a worthless piece of shit. No one should be called that for accidentally dropping her handbag. Edit. I also offered Martha a bottle of Fiji water and she said she only drinks Voss. Was waiting for this. I work in the aviation industry and have for 25 years now. Back when I was still fairly new, I was working line service for INFBO, fixed base operator, the folks who provide handling services for private/corporate aircraft. One day a plane comes in after dropping a passenger off in Maine. The crew needed someone to clean the airplane, and the job fell to me. The plane was trashed. Food ground into the carpeting, garbage all over the place, pet hair everywhere. Took me a few hours to scrub the inside of that plane. The crew thanked me and gave me a $100 tip after. Then the captain said to me, "You'll never guess who made that mess." Martha Stewart. I was in shock. He said she was the biggest bitch they had ever flown, and both the captain and first officer said they would refuse to fly her in the future. I'm now an airline pilot, but I have several friends who went into the corporate/private/fractional side of aviation. Martha Stewart has been kicked out of every fractional jet ownership program there is: Raytheon Travel Air, Flight Options, NetJets, FlexJet, and several others, all because of her abusive and downright nasty treatment of staff. From personal experience, Bill Nye was an absolute asshole from my interaction with him. It was perhaps the saddest moment of don't meet your heroes in my life. I used to be his neighbor in Seattle. Nye was a notorious neighborhood dick. Unbelievably rude to the children in the village center that idolized him from his BDSG show that was currently running. This was 1996 to 1998. My mom used to be a journalist and she interviewed Bill at one point. She said that he was being rude, disrespectful, and just a total ass the whole time. Bill Nye. Everyone I've ever talked with who met him has terrible stories. Has just a grumpy and mean asshole. My dad's old office was the warehouse he filmed the shows, and there was a ton of old promo stuff and a huge face cutout in the basement. I don't know if he still lives in the area, but my elementary class saw him while out on a field trip and he rudely brushed us all off with quite a few swear words when we nicely approached him just to say hi. No autographs or anything. Yes, he was hired to be the main speaker at my alma mater's engineering open house back in the 90s. He showed up drunk, refused to do the full science presentation he had been contracted to do. He had been paid for the full hour, but he argued loudly that he wouldn't do more than 15 minutes, and he started getting aggressively mean towards young kids who were excited to see him. At one point he yelled at a 5-year-old to fuck off when he was mic'd up in front of an entire gymnasium of people. He was asked to leave, even though he'd been there for only a short time. Steve Jobs. It's pretty well known that he was a giant asshole, but he's still pretty romanticized in the tech sphere. I got to have a chat with Steve Wozniak, and while there was still an air of respect, Wozniak said Jobs had a great way with word/marketing/tying the bows on a product. It was definitely underlined with a disdain for certain personality traits. He also made a lot of this clear during his presentation too. Side note, Wozniak was a freaking delight to talk to. The dude just used enthusiasm and such positive energy overall. The fact he even spent like 15 minutes talking to me after the convention was awesome in itself. There were hundreds of people there, and I bet most of them could have given him a more topical/engaging conversation. In fact, I mostly just wanted a photo with him. He was the one that engaged in a longer conversation. From what my fiancé told me is that Beyonce is extremely entitled and rude to people. He worked in a restaurant where many celebrities would go to, and he loved most of them, but absolutely hated Beyonce and Jay-Z. Remember when she had an entire hospital wing closed so she could give birth? It wasn't an entire wing of a hospital, but it was an entire section of the maternity ward. In some ways that's worse. How many pregnant women were turned away? Additionally, her hired goons, bodyguards, would stop people from entering the entire maternity ward and tell them they couldn't come in, even if they had every right to be there. The end. Thanks for watching.